Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Josh and Jason Monday Christian and Conspiracy Podcast Show. I am your host, Josh Monday. If you don't know me, I'm a Christian rapper, devoted husband, father, and Army veteran. And I'd like to introduce you to my co-host. He's a Christian, devoted husband, and father. What's up, Jason?
Hey, what's up, everybody? How's it going, Chris? And how's it going, Josh? Hope everybody's doing good out there and staying healthy. God bless everybody out there. And let's get this show on the road because it's going to be.
Sure. So I'd like to introduce you guys to our guest, is Chris Williamson. Your show is called Vanished. Is it Vanished podcast?
Just Vanished. Vanished. If you put Vanished into any podcatcher, it'll find it.
Okay. So yeah, just look up Vanished if you guys want to get a hold of Chris. Chris he has a bunch of awesome shows. He hit me up after we did the Mark Sargent, I think, show.
Yeah.
I was like, cool, man. I think this will be interesting, but let's get the show on the road. We're gonna be talking about Amelia Earhart, it looks like. Her disappearance, which is a good conspiracy. Maybe a little DB Cooper, we'll kind of get into it, and we'll give the floor to Chris. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor, and willing to talk about wherever you guys want to venture tonight. We can talk about all that. So if you want to start with Earhart, we can certainly start with Earhart.
Perfect. Let's do this for sure.
All right, man. Well, for those who don't know, Amelia Earhart was, a pretty famous person, historically speaking. She was born in Atchison, Kansas, which is not too far from where I'm sitting right now. And she was a record-setting aviatrix at the time. She grew up and kind of grew into the golden age of aviation. And she, sort of broke onto the scene and immediately started having this impact, this massive impact, and basically broke every record you can imagine in aviation, did a lot of different things that no one had ever done. And at the height of her career, or sort of at the pinnacle of her career, she's on a world flight attempt with her navigator, Fred Noonan. And they are on the very last leg of their attempt, trying to find this tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And they basically disappear. They basically vanish into thin earth from based on who you talk to, just a couple 100 miles shy of their destination, which just kind of adds to the tragedy of it. They're very close, and they just basically disappeared, and no one's ever seen the plane. No one has seen Noonan. No one has seen Earhart. So they basically vanish into thin air, and it's been 85 years ago this July that they've been missing.
So I think what we need to understand, guys, is that the airplane was actually invented only in like 1903, guys. So this is like December 17, 1903 is when it was just invented, right? So Earhart, her flight was in July 2nd, 1937?
Yeah. So July 2nd, 1937 is when Earhart and Noonan disappear over the Pacific Ocean. So 1937.
So, I mean, the first commercial flight, I think, was in 1914, guys. So she, you got to think about it. The technology wasn't where it's at today, obviously. Okay. So she, for her to be doing this and pulling these maneuvers and breaking records, I mean, that takes a lot of courage, a lot of guts. I'm surprised that she was never in the military, right? I'm surprised she was never in the Air Force or anything, man.
Yeah, no, she wasn't. She had some experience in up north in Canada just after the First World War. She was a nurse. She was she worked in a hospital, and she saw some of the men coming back after war, and she helped take care of them, and she actually got really sick herself at that point, and really from that point on, she had this sort of real distaste for war. She was sort of a feminist. She was someone that was very passive when it came to war. She didn't believe that we should be getting involved. And she had seen it firsthand. And I think that had a big effect on her, the rest of her life. So
I see she won the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is, I was kind of looking into that. I was like, wow, she won an award probably for her heroic, stuff that she was doing. Usually military members get that, but she got it because of her,
solo flight. Yeah. Her solo flights. Yeah. So she's,
sorry.
Go for it.
She came across, she started in Oakland, right? That flight started in Oakland, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was supposed to go along the equator. So they're not taking it. They didn't take a straight line all the way there. It was zigzag all the way across I was wondering what her disappearance was like. I started trying to dig and see if there's any rumors about it or And I heard some pretty different ones, some pretty off the wall ones, and some pretty interesting ones. But what I'm thinking is that if you're flying across the equator, right, you would never hit ice.
Yeah, right.
Hit it. I think she hit ice. And she's like,
well,
I shouldn't be flying across the equator. I feel like she found something that wasn't supposed to be there because nobody's ever took a flight like this before. Not man, not anybody else. So that was when I started thinking about flat Earth. That's what I was like, man. I was like, wow, man, if you were trying to keep a secret like this, and then I started I know we always bring up flat Earth on almost every episode. This bothered me because I swear to you, it said something. I'm like, why would she fly across just the equator? She's not allowed to fly up or down. And this is before isn't this before the treaty or just after?
Oh yeah, this is way before the treaty, bro. The treaty was already. Admiral Byrd was the one that well, I know Chris is familiar with this as well, but Admiral Byrd that's another guy that we've talked about on the podcast, guys. So Admiral Byrd was going on these, he was doing the north. Well, I'm like pointing up and down. I don't even know what it is, but
they only put enough gas in there and fuel, but she's for a trip that wasn't expected to be taking 10,000 feet ascend in the sky. That burned up fuel, so she had to go stop somewhere. She stopped off there, and then she vanishes. And then there's another rumor that she was working for the United States and that the war and stuff like that. That was an interesting one to me. That's what I felt was very interesting.
Well, Chris,
the wall stuff crazy, but I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, the spy theory. Yeah.
What are the couple of the different conspiracies that are out there, Chris? Also, did you write a book too, or didn't you just complete a book?
It's an interesting time. It's actually just getting ready to go to the publisher right now for to sort of get created. So we'll have the book out on July 2nd on the 85th anniversary this year. So it'll be out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's been an interesting process,
dude. Awesome, bro. That's very good. I don't think I have enough time right now because but maybe when I'm maybe in my 60s, step back and write one and just be like, okay, cool.
I can barely read a book, much less write a book. Dude, I can barely even read a book. I can barely even go through the Bible right now. I got so much going on.
Yeah, well,
drive for it.
If you can get through that, you can get through anything. I think as far as the complexity of that. But we're working on it. It's almost done. It's almost out of my hands. It's almost in that sweet spot right now where I can just sort of wash my hands of it and just kind of enjoy sort of the promotional period that'll eventually come for it and all that good stuff. But it's sort of the culmination of my involvement in the Earhart case. It's been a little over 20 years now for me. So I'm tired. It's been a long time, and that's, I'm considered a newbie, I think, by the stretch of the Earhart case. There's been people that have been doing this for 30 to 50 years of their whole lives, and so someone like me is just kind of toward the bottom or even the middle of the pack as far as experience is concerned. So this book is the culmination. So when it comes out, I get to sort of take a deep breath finally and try to enjoy it.
Let me know whenever a guest comes on and they have a book, bro. I always buy it. So make sure you send me a link. I'll definitely purchase it from you. But go ahead, Chris. Go into some of the theories that some people have, if you could, and kind of dig into it, because it sounds pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, man. Well, there's no shortage. We could go all night on this, but basically the foundation is what we sort of already touched on, was that they were en route to this tiny island, and they just fell short. They ran out of fuel. They as you guys said, they misinterpreted some of the headwinds and some of the stuff that they would be dealing with, some of the radio communication. They never made two-way radio communication with this Coast Guard cutter Itasca, this ship that was lying in wait off Howland Avenue or Howland Island. So they were coming down, and that the Itasca was there to sort of help guide them into the island, let them refuel, and make their last stop from Howland back to Hawaii, and then eventually to Oakland to complete it. So that's the foundation. There's a lot of different theories based off who you believe. One of them is known as the Castaway Theory. If you Google a group called TIGAR, it's TIGHAR. They stand for the International Group of Historic Aircraft Recovery. They have believed and worked on this island called Nikamororo, which is about 405 miles away from Howland Island, for a long time now. And they've been working on this island, gathering, circumstantial evidence, some pretty interesting stuff there. There were these bones that were found in this camp on this island that they have been, working on for many years, claiming just recently or just within a couple of years ago now that the bones likely match Amelia Earhart. There's a lot of different variety and debate there. One of the other theories is the you touched on it as well, that she might have been a spy. Japanese capture is a big one. It's been going on since 1960. And, that thing just kind of, it's a massive umbrella that all these different subplots are underneath. And the whole idea is that she and Noonan were captured by the Japanese, were held for a time. It kind of ventures out depending on what you believe. She either died in Japanese custody, or she was, buried in Saipan somewhere, or she died of dysentery in a jail cell in a prison called Garapan, in a town called Garapan. Wow. And it's a pretty brutal end, however you want to look at that particular theory. And there's also, an extension of that theory that she was actually returned, repatriated back to the United States. And it's basically just an alternate ending to that story. The idea was that she lived, and she lived to a very old age.
Wasn't there a name of that? I can't remember what the name of the lady was that they said that she came back as.
Yeah, her name was Irene Bolam. And she was a pilot in her own right, and she has a very sketchy past in her own right. And we actually, we have some audio tapes of Irene Bolam that have never been heard before, where she sort of talks about her personal experiences. And we've uncovered, since we started kind of looking into this, that she did in fact know Amelia Earhart, pretty well. They knew each other. They had interacted several times, and the idea was that maybe, this kind of ties into this theory that there's multiple planes involved, that Amelia Earhart was on a spy mission, and that there was a real person and there was a decoy plane with a decoy pilot, and that's how Bolam might have gotten involved. It just goes on and on and on. And then there, the most current one is, the newest one is something called the Buca theory, Buca hypothesis, however you want to call it. And basically the long and short of that is they were flying, and they got to about the halfway point from there's a little place called Buca, Bougainville, and it's actually kind of right in the middle of Howland Island and Ley, New Guinea, where they took off. And they essentially the idea was that they essentially turned around when they realized that they weren't going to make Howland off the fuel that they had. They were burning too much fuel. They made a executive decision between the two of them, turned around, got into a storm, lightning hit the aircraft, struck the left side of the aircraft, and it actually landed in this island, or off the coast of this island. It sits in less than 150 feet of water right now. And that plane has been investigated for years by a team called Project Blue Angel, and that's headed up by a gentleman by the name of Bill Snavely. And they're out there in Buca trying to determine if this plane that they have out there is not only a plane, but the plane. And if it is, then, we now have to retell this story, and it kind of challenges the status quo and challenges historical record a little bit. But all of these that I've mentioned in this short period of time really is just kind of, everybody's sort of been fighting for these theories for, sometimes 4 or 5 decades in some cases. Wow. And going back and forth. And there's always information that's coming out, every year or something hits again with Earhart. So
what do you think though, Chris? What do you think happened? Like you're because all your research, what you've done is that's 20 years.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
I would believe what you would say. That's like expert to me.
Well, expertise isn't necessarily based on time. I'll just say that. For me personally, I've been involved in it. I've neck deep for a long time. Yes, I've interviewed, everybody, mostly everybody who's anybody in the case. There's been a few standouts I haven't been able to talk with yet, but I believe it's a possibility that any one of these things, could be it. Crash and Sink has the official story is kind of behind it. They have testimony from the radio operators that wrote down in the logs the exact words that Amelia Earhart was saying. They were there. They were pulling in a certain signal strength of radio connection. She had a radio, and they had these radio signals that were being sent out to the Itasca, and that was telling the Itasca that she was close, like within a couple hundred miles out. She even says it. We're about 200 miles out. We're about 100 miles out. So it has that, but I think the elephant in the room, so to speak, is Buca right now, because Buca's got this plane, and nobody in the history of the 85 years of this investigation has ever found a plane. And now Buca's got this plane. I use this analogy in the show about murder cases and murder investigations. You see this all the time. If you're a detective called in to investigate a murder, And let's say, it's a domestic dispute gone wrong, and there's, you investigate the house, it's at the house, and you find blood splatter on the wall, and you find a murder weapon maybe, but there's no body. You can't find the body anywhere. So that represents, well, this is where obviously the crime happened potentially. But then let's say, a colleague calls you and says, hey, we found a body in a dumpster 2 miles down the street, 2 miles down in this back alley dumpster. Well, if you're that detective, what do? Do you go investigate that body, or do you just say, yeah, it's impossible, it could be my victim, so I'm not even going to look at it? And that's kind of what's happening with Buca. Is, they have this body, the aircraft is a body essentially, and it's a third person in this equation essentially. And that's what everybody's looking for. So I think you got to rule out Buca. You got to go in there and investigate it properly and rule it in or out, and then you got to walk backwards from there, and that's how you do it.
How much? Oh, sorry, dude. But how much? How is the plane? The shape of the plane in the water? How preserved is it?
It's not, and that's kind of the downside about it. If this thing is, if we're looking at something like crash and sink, and it's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it's 18,000 feet below the surface. We all know with history like the Titanic, that they can actually bring up stuff. It's remarkably preserved underwater and depths of that. On the flip side, in Buca, it's one of the most, disastrous nautical environments on the face of the earth. It's wrapped in coral. It's basically degraded by the coral, I should say. It's basically a shell of an airplane right now. It's a corpse. And so the only way they're going to be able to determine if that's her plane is by going into some of this stuff, maybe chunks of the engine or whatever might lie down there next to the wreckage, and maybe pull out something that's copper, maybe copper spark plugs or something like that. It's important to note that airplane had a very specific part list on it. So if they could match up even a part from a spark plug off one of the engines, it's a slam dunk at that point. So that's how they have to approach it. But you're not going to get this big spectacle if it's actually out of Buca. You're not going to get this big spectacle of them pulling the airplane out of the water. It's just never going to happen. It's an underwater gravesite now.
Where's Buca? Where's Buca located next to? Is it anywhere next to Japan at all, or
no? It's kind of far. Yeah, it's far. So if you look at Howland Island, which is basically Howland Island is, for most people, they agree that that's where she was going. That was her point. So if you look at that and use that as sort of like a home base, you got Howland Island there, that's square dead center. About 405 miles away, you've got Nicaragua. About 800 miles away, you've got the Marshall Islands, which would be in that area. And then about 1,700 miles away is Buca. So
Marshall Islands is another theory that somebody has, right? Something with the Marshall Islands, like
it's Japanese capture. Yeah, it's one of those. It's under that umbrella. Okay. Yeah. So you've got Japanese capture, and then you've got all these different pathways that it basically walks down, depending on what you believe. There's a lot of people that believe that Japanese were ultimately responsible for their death, but they believe differently as opposed to, some people that are just universally in agreement. There's a lot of people that think it happened one way, or it happened another way. And so you kind of have that. So it's tough because you got a lot of different stuff, a lot of different, competing facts and competing sets of theories and things of that nature.
Yeah. And like you said, there's some, and you're right that time doesn't necessarily make you an expert. You're right. Because some people are, like some people are more easily convinced on something, and they don't dig deep and deeper. It's good to dig into all of it and then come up with your own theory of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly what you do, and that's what we do with the show. Is foundationally speaking, the show is there to challenge the facts. The tagline for the show is "Follow the evidence wherever it leads," and that's what we do. My partner is a criminal defense attorney out of Austin, and we do this show, and we do these mock trials, this trial by jury, which is kind of what we become known for. And the whole original idea as it stood was, hey, if we're all sitting in a jury box and we're listening to all 5 of these sets of experts, present these theories with one of us advocating, if you're in a jury box, what's going to sell you? If you think, hey, we have witnesses that were talking to her, or at least, putting out communication. We have the logs. We know where she was going. She was telling us it's she ran out of fuel, and that's that. Or you're going to look at something like forensic evidence, or something like 200 eyewitnesses in the Marshall Islands and Saipan that say they saw Earhart, Noonan, or the Lockheed Electra. They interacted with one or the 3, or sometimes multiple. If you have 200 eyewitnesses to a murder, that's kind of hard to ignore. So you have to kind of look at that. Of course, that would never happen. But if you did, it would be impossible to ignore that. So that's kind of what you're dealing with here. You know, that's just kind of how it works. That's the nature of the case.
Those 200 people's story matched up exactly the same, like very close. Well, maybe like in the same time. But I'm thinking like, how can you even test the age of the plane? Because if that's the age of the plane, a lot of planes would go, who knows how many times of those flights were being made through there and somebody crashed. But if it's that old, like, and when you think like when they made that course and they plotted that course, that maybe, you know, is a pretty big thing in America. So maybe they had like places out there. Is that like an American waters, or is that just national waters? Like that's like
it's international. I mean, it's so if you buy the spy theory, you know, if your idea is like, hey, I think this is good, and it's certainly got some compelling evidence on it. You know, the whole idea that they were going to be taking pictures of certain islands and certain spots is because, you know, this was pre-World War II. Obviously, this was several years before Pearl Harbor, and that, you know, the official.
But I'm thinking like when she made they plotted the course, you would think that I'm thinking like other countries, or if there would be a pretty big thing in America, it'd be like a worldwide, sold event, and other countries would be like, oh, maybe we'll help you along the way, like let me know where you're going, and always keep in contact with, because they probably it's a big thing. It's one woman is making a huge step in history.
Yeah.
So you think other countries like, okay, we'll help her out. This is not war. This isn't about like, it's like a marathon. If you're going to have the same exact thing, other countries would probably get involved. So you would think that they would, okay, if you're over Buca, or if you're over, what's the other island?
Nicaragua. It's a tough one to say. Nicaragua. Yeah.
I think the people out there be like, okay, well, we're going to help you. If you're by here, you know, hit us up with the radio. And if you're going down, because you're almost run out of gas. You know, you're like that close. You're only gauged about 800 miles. And that could burn if you go, like you said, the headwinds, and also ascending. Why did they 10,000 feet? That's a lot. That's high.
Yeah, that's a great question. We talk about that. We dispute that a lot on the show, or debate that a lot in the show. That she, in her last radio log, she actually says we're flying at 1,000 feet. Now, why would she want to do that? There's a lot of theory to that. One of the reasons was because that they believed that there was cloud cover over the island. And if you look at if you look at Howland Island, it's very, very difficult to spot. And they were really doing something that was very difficult to do. And they had very little visibility. And so we think that it's possible that she could have dropped to 1,000 feet to get below that cloud cover. But at that point, it would have been a very difficult point for her to see the island, even at 1,000 feet. So there's also, you know, the idea that she dropped to 1,000 feet because she knew she was going down. You know, the fuel was actually rapidly depleting, and she knew this was the end. She basically, her last word was the word wait. She cuts off almost mid-sentence and she goes out. So they're thinking maybe that was when she threw down the mic and she was taking the reins of the plane, and she was trying to do something called a pancake landing, which is basically putting the airplane down as flat as you can on a nautical surface, or even a hard surface. So that way, you know, the belly of the plane hits the surface, and you can actually skid and try to preserve the plane as much as you can. If that would have happened, then there's a lot of people that agree that plane was made of aluminum. That plane might have been able to be like a ping pong ball with wings. It would have floated indefinitely. But if that thing went down, and we know it was nose heavy with the engines, if it went down and it pierced something and water started rushing in, she would have had maybe 30 seconds to a minute before that plane was underwater. It would have been really quick. And there ain't no ship that's going to get to her within 30 seconds to a minute at that point. So it's a scary situation. The ending is scary for her. However you want to slice it, you know, whether she died as a castaway on an island by herself, whether she sank in the middle of the ocean, whether she was executed, or, you know, and kicked into a shallow grave, or died alone and, you know, infected with dysentery in a prison, or she came back to the United States, and she was basically sworn to secrecy, and she never flew again, and she lost her whole life. She essentially died in a sense that way. So it's not pleasant anywhere you cut it for Amelia Earhart as far as the ending is concerned.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor was in 1941, and she disappeared in 1937, right?
Oh,
right. Yeah. So there's people that believe that she might have been, you know, it's possible she could have been in custody for there's some of the theory that says 5 to 6 years, 7 years even. So it's possible, if you believe that and you feel that's the case, that she was actually in Japanese custody when Pearl Harbor happened and she was still alive.
The thing that I was thinking was like, for her to be a spy and have to, to go over Japan at that time, 1937. I mean, how involved were we in the war? We weren't in the war yet. America.
We weren't. And of course that would change drastically just a handful of years later. But we weren't really that involved. And I think
we were neutral at the time.
Yeah, sort of. But I think FDR saw the writing on the wall, and I think that's partly why he, again, I mean, this is a choose your own adventure kind of thing at this point, but that's partly why he would have told her, hey, we need you to go and take these pictures of the Pacific Theater and these mandated islands. We need to get intel on these things. And that's possible.
Maybe they were like, we're going to fund your flight. You can still break your record, but we need you to go do this for us as well. Right. Or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Quid pro quo. Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right on the right track. I mean, if you go with that idea, the idea is it's a quid pro quo. So she, not to go too deep into the weeds here, but basically she was going to go a different direction the first time. She was going to go, she went east basically for the actual flight, but she wasn't going to always go east. She was going to go the opposite direction. And they had this incident in Hawaii where she ground looped and crashed the plane on takeoff. And, that was after a successful first leg from Oakland to Hawaii. And so she grounds a plane, crashes a plane. Purdue University, who she had been actually employed by as a basically an adjunct professor at the time for about a year and a half at this point, financed that plane to the tune of $80,000, which, $80,000 in 1936 money is a lot of money. And, they basically mortgaged their future. This plane or this world flight was going to seal her fate. It turns out it sealed it in a different way, but it was going to seal it the rest of her career. And, there's a lot of talk that when that plane ground looped and crashed, they had no money. They were out of options. And it took 11 branches of the United States government to come together to refund the rebuild of that plane. And we don't know what we don't know about maybe what they would have said at that point. And that kind of alludes to what you're talking about.
Like, no problem. Have a seat real quick. All right, let's talk this over. Yep. We're going to need you to do this for us. And we're going to, and like you said, I think that's interesting where they had a decoy plane actually doing it. People are following that plane while she's over here doing the spy work. That's an interesting, I didn't even, this is why I like that.
It gets crazy.
Because there wasn't that many women pilots back then. There wasn't
it was
grab a whole bunch of them. And so if you're using one woman and you have another, that's because that other woman, that other woman that was involved in it, that they said that she came back as, she was a pilot too, right? She had a license, and that's kind of like there were still women like just sitting at home and baking, cakes and stuff and taking care of their kids. They weren't going out trying to be a pilot and trying to step up and do it like what men were doing back in the day, because that's not what they were doing. And I'm not saying like trying to be like sexist or anything, but that's just right. That's just how it was.
Yeah, Amelia Earhart was certainly the loudest voice in the room. She was a pilot. She certainly wasn't the first. There was some fantastic pilots back in the day. Amelia herself took part in the 1929 Women's Air Derby, and that had, if you look at that, we talk about it in the book. If you look at that Air Derby, it's like a hall of fame of female aviation, female pilots. She was close with all of them. They were all pretty close friends. They founded the 99s, which is still in operation today, and it's an organization for women pilots. She was the first president of the 99s. She had that platform with Purdue. She was making $50,000 a year, or $40,000 to $50,000 a year on lectures, which is equivalent to about $500,000 today on lectures on the lecture circuit. She had inspired many hundreds of women at Purdue who were going to get just a general degree to become to go a different way and become engineers, mathematicians. She was a pioneer in STEM before STEM was even an acronym. She was a really loud voice for female empowerment and for women in aviation. And a lot of women now, which is really remarkable, credit this woman who disappeared 85 years ago with pioneering, sections and parts of the space industry and aerospace, and why we've had female NASA, people in NASA, executives at NASA, and female astronauts. And, you could go all day. Her reach is astounding. 85 years later, which is why people care so much about this, I think.
Okay. So, usually for someone to get famous in the conspiracy world, did she have any ties to any secret societies, anything like that? Eastern Star? Did you see anything about that? you know, for her to be, you know, I'm not trying to put any negative light on her. I'm just saying like,
No, not at all.
Sometimes it's
No,
hard to get famous like this, or to be that person in the front without having to do something to get there. You know, I don't know
Right.
about back then. I know how it is now, but
yeah,
anything like that. Just curious.
no, not that we've ever uncovered. I mean, she was, you know, speculation runs rampant throughout this case. So it depends on really kind of who you talk to and what kind of what they believe. But there's you know, her influence was wide reaching when it came to just female, you know, just women empowerment, just women in aviation. And she was breaking all these records. She was, you know, there were, you know, massive ticker tape parades for her when she came back as a passenger for her first go round across the Atlantic. And then when she broke that record, I mean, this is a woman who walked away from 11 crashes, you know, in the golden age of aviation. She broke, you know, there's dozens of records, some that hold to this day. You know, one of my favorite stories is the story of the autogyro, which is like this experimental helicopter sort of aircraft that was, you know, basically debuting in that time. And she broke the altitude record in that. You know, she was the first person in that plane. She's, you know, she was basically like a, you know, modern day or you know, I won't say modern day, but like like a female version of Indiana Jones in a way. She was a scientist. That plane was going to be testing a lot of scientific theory. That was part of why they called it something. They called it the flying laboratory for a reason. It was because it was basically a scientific experiment. So she was, you know, she was just big, making her mark all around the world. She was an editor for Cosmopolitan. She had her own luggage line. She had all these endorsements. You know, she was as big as Charles Lindbergh. That's why they called her Lady Lindy. You know, she was a female version of Charles Lindbergh, essentially. So, you know, and she's got this big question mark on the end of her story. She's 39 years old when she disappears. You know, that's old for a woman at that time that was doing what she did with as much death as there was in aviation. It's a wonder that she lived to 39, you know. Pretty remarkable. But yeah, she was just imagine the most famous person you can think of, just the most famous female you can think of, you know, just vanishing off the face of the earth. And just no one ever, you know, decades go by and no one ever finds out anything. And that's kind of where we're at. You know, we have a lot of information, but we're no closer to finding this aircraft and knowing the ending than we were on July 3rd, the day after they disappeared 85 years ago. So it's really remarkable in that sense. You know, it's a case that just kind of never ends.
Wow.
I see your husband was George Palmer Putman, huh? He's
Putnam. Yeah.
Putnam.
Yeah, he was actually he was a big time publisher, and he was
publisher. A lot of money, there. See that? Yeah.
He had published Charles Lindbergh's autobiography 5 years before Earhart, you know, came on the scene, and so he was smitten by her when he first talked to her, and you know, their whole relationship is a whole nother deal. It's pretty amazing in its own right. And I mean, you know, she's a pretty big deal, you know, in a lot of different senses. And I think that's why people are so aggressive when it comes to trying to solve this case and be the ones to crack it essentially and finish it, you know.
So, man, that's interesting.
I didn't know she was that famous like that, because I did when I was younger, did a report on her. I didn't know
Yeah.
It was just like it was like just talked about like her accomplishments. But I didn't. She was BA, dude. She was a BA woman, man. That's
she was.
That's pretty outstanding. That's great information on somebody that clears a lot of my thoughts about that. I'm like, dang. So she's like the movie star, like she blew like Venus Williams and all these type of people back then, like the forefront of doing something so great. And she paved the way for all these women. She helped out even her death doesn't go, it doesn't go like in vain. She helped out a lot of women throughout history, all the way till now, just being anything now, being strong and being heads of companies, being heads of, you know, a $1 billion company, stuff like that. She's, you know, like look, I'm not saying anything good about Kamala Harris, but there you go. She's a you know, a woman vice president now. That I don't think that you would have that type of stuff without with this woman in this era of life.
Women like her, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those situations where she was, she takes a, she takes a big chunk of that. I think, she's a reason why a lot of people are as big as they are.
That stuff like that. That's like something that's pretty cool, man. I didn't think of it that way. I just thought of it as just a mystery that's it, not how like accomplished she was. I never even thought to look into that. That's awesome.
Yeah. There's all kinds of fun stories. There's a woman who taught her how to fly earlier in her career. Her name was Netta Snook. If you look her up, she's an icon in her own right. She was from Iowa, and Amelia Earhart had been to Iowa as a little girl. And they struck up a conversation one day. They'd met each other, and Netta agreed to teach her. And a few lessons later, Earhart's in the air, right? So she's flying within a few lessons.
It's a natural.
Yeah. So what's crazy is, early on in the golden age of aviation, like you see like little things. Earhart was very self-aware. I don't think you could have put anybody else in Earhart's position and had that person have the same fame and the same sort of notoriety. I think she was very special. There's a story about her first. Netta was with her when they first crashed for the first time. It was a first crash, and it was in a field. It was called Mines Field, I think, or Miller Field, which is now LAX, of course. And they're taking off. She's too close to the trees. Back in that time, they used the eucalyptus trees as windbreaks, and she pulled on the stick to try to get the aircraft to go up higher, and it stalled. And they sort of kited down gently into the grass there, and they damaged the ship, but they didn't hurt. Nobody got hurt. And all these people are running over. And Netta turns around, and Amelia's sort of facing away from her, and she's looking at the fuselage. And Netta goes, "What are you doing? These people, they're coming to see you." And she says, "Give me a minute. I'm putting on lipstick." So Amelia Earhart knew. She was very self-aware. She knew how to, we always talk about how she was, she was like just this bigger than life icon. She was kind of like, I've kind of compared her a little bit to Marilyn Monroe in the sense that, like, Marilyn Monroe, if you look at some of the stuff, she could just turn it on and turn it off. It was a very cool thing that she could do. And I think Earhart had a little bit of that in her. She was America's sweetheart. She could turn it on and turn it off. She could cuss like a Marine Corps DI. She was, she was one of the guys. She was very rugged, but she was also very girly in a sense. She could walk that line. And that's what made her an icon. It was sort of this, if Amelia Earhart was alive today, she would be like a social media, darling, because that's kind of how she was before all that happened. She was like that.
You said she crashed how many times in her career? Of like
11 times
so
in her career.
Did she ever crash in water?
That's a great question. I don't think so. That's a good question. I don't, unless you count the last one,
like
yeah, unless you count
crash in water. That's what because she knew how to crash. And I mean, like when she was going down, she knew how to land into where she was going to survive, because obviously she only whatever happened the last time, but she lived those 11 times.
Yeah.
And she knew how to do it. So I'm wondering if any of those crashes were ever in water, if you could record any recorded ones, and maybe she knew how to get out of the situation like that. And maybe she did survive on an island or something like that. That's how far
it's interesting.
From Buca, how far is that?
So Buca is about 1,700 miles. It's the furthest site from Howland Island where they were, where they're supposed to be. So Buca relies on them actually leaving Ley New Guinea with less fuel than the plane could carry. There was a lot of speculation about how much fuel they had on that takeoff, and they're saying that they were at capacity. I mean, they were pulling everything they could think of off that plane to conserve even ounces of weight, because they were that concerned about the plane. And so the idea was that, they left with a little less fuel on board, and they encountered stuff that they didn't anticipate encountering, and they were smart enough to say, we're going to turn around. And then they hit bad weather and crash off of Buca, which is, on the position. It's basically in an area. It was on their flight path, but it was an area never searched by anybody. So, Bill Snavely sort of has been working this theory for a little bit.
Do you swim there? Would you think the current could take you into that island?
No, I mean it's often, it's off a main ocean. So I mean, I would imagine that it's when you're in that vicinity. The idea that the plane crashed pretty close to land and kind of hit coral. kind of hit a lot of reef and kind of just skidded down on this embankment. It's underwater embankment, and it stays there. I think at that point that thing wouldn't have floated much. It would have basically just stuck there. And I think that's what happened. You know, if that's actually the plane, then that plane has just been sitting in, 150 feet of water for 85 years, which is ironic that it's that close.
Yeah.
You got to look at that like if you compare it to crash and sink, you're talking about an area, they're looking for Howland Island, which is a floating needle in a haystack in the middle of the biggest ocean on the planet. I mean, it's an area that's the search area is an area that's roughly the size of Texas, and you're looking for a 39.5-foot airplane. It's tough. It's very tough. And so if that thing was off the coast of Buca this whole time, it would be quite sad if they didn't get out there and actually try to determine if that was the plane or not, I think, at this point anyway. So
I see a picture of her walking with like Herbert Hoover in 1932.
Yeah, that's right.
On the president grounds at the White House. So she's definitely probably had a lot of connections, man.
Street cred.
Oh, yeah. She does. Yeah, and she, like I said, it goes with the fame. She was very close with not only her, not so much close with Hoover, but she had interactions with Hoover, but she was very close with FDR, and very close, even more so with Eleanor Roosevelt. They were good friends. She took Eleanor up in a secret flight at one time, and it's a really famous, fun story. They were close. So you look at sort of the Japanese capture idea and this idea of repatriation that's kind of put into the mix. And, on the face value, it kind of seems a little ridiculous. But when you start looking at it, if anybody would have had the ability to have themselves repatriated or know the right people, it would have been Amelia Earhart. I mean, she was close with the president, very close. So it's possible that, they could have done something with that. There is some truth to the fact that her dear friend, Jackie Cochran, who was a pioneering aviator in her own right, and she was actually the founder of the WASP, the Women Air Force Service Pilots. So that goes back to your military connection. Went over to Japan under the guise that she was going to file some report about some military stuff there, and she came back and never filed that report. And a lot of people believe that she went over there under that guise to go bring her friend back, which would have been pretty interesting. And it's not ridiculous. We just sent a U.S. president not that long ago over to North Korea to bring back two North Korean American journalists that were of North Korean descent, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but it was something very similar. So if we can do that now, we certainly could have done that then. And you just look at all that stuff, and it's pretty interesting.
Put her in witness protection or something,
Yeah, it would have been before that was a thing, but she would have been one of the early people, and she would have had to probably agree that she can't. They basically her life, that previous life, is over, and a lot of people have a real problem with that. They believe that there's no way a woman that was that loud and that had that big a voice would have just been quiet and just never flown again and never, never interacted again. So
unless she was like getting straight tortured, it was.
Well, what's Noonan's background? He was a navigator. He was you're navigating a flight that's never been done before.
Yeah. Noonan and Noonan would have been the guy. We try to shine that spotlight on Noonan as much as we can. He was the best navigator on the planet, period. If you were going to do a flight of that magnitude, he's the guy you want in the plane with you. He was a pioneer for Pan American Airways. And he was, he had done a lot of stuff in the Pacific with the Clippers and, for Pan Am, and he was he had nautical experience. He had, obviously aeronautical experience. He was a pilot in his own right. And he was the guy. So his navigation would have been spot on. A lot of people that are sort of on the crash and sink team or the crash and sink camp believe that his navigation was spot on. And that translates because Earhart herself was saying, we're 200 miles out or 100 miles out. We must be on you, but cannot see you. They couldn't see the island. So they believed, if you go with that camp, they believed that they were right there, man, that he had them right there, and they just fell short. And that's, that adds, if that's the case, that adds to the tragedy, because they were just a couple hundred miles away, not that far.
She got a crash. I don't think that plane shouldn't have tore up like that. Then it should have. She could have skidded and probably floated in, and it probably floated to that a little bit closer to land, and then they just abandoned it and just landed on the island. And I heard the story that she had a radio, and she was still trying to radio people, "Hey, this is Amelia Earhart, help!"
Oh yeah.
And you, like you said, you're marooned on an island, and maybe Noonan ate her. It was someone ate somebody. But I heard about the crabs eating her, or like, but you're talking about it. That is a scary situation to be, like you said, that no matter what happened, that even flying that far out there and doing that, planning that, and being the guy that's like that missed it.
Right.
Man, sorry, we were just ran out of gas. It was a great, fist bump it, give me a hug, going down together.
Yeah. Sometimes that happens, man. Sometimes you can have, a lot of, we had a guest on the show, Tom Detweiler, who, helped. He was the operations manager on Titanic, and he's worked with Nauticos and some of these other companies. And he's one of the most brilliant minds in the world at this. And so, he on our very own show said, a lot of times in these disasters, it's not one thing that goes wrong. It's the sum of a lot of little things that go wrong. And sometimes, we talked about this in some of the openings of our show, like it's possible that a bunch of things just added up to Earhart and Noonan having a really bad day and they just fell short. And, it adds to the tragedy of the whole case. And, there's been this whole other aspect of the case that has been quite interesting in the last 85 years. It's everybody dividing up into these respective camps and sort of working these theories, and everybody sort of believing they have it right, and everybody trying to prove that their theory is accurate, and the rest of it is just ridiculous.
He's so famous, and buddy with the president, and she was only 100 miles off, whatever, any direction, she's about 100 miles off that she was saying or whatever. Wouldn't they be searching the like way more extensively? Like, if you're not hitting your spot, she still had radio contact. And what I'm thinking is that the technology wasn't that, and it's not advanced. It's just like, you got a rinky dink radio.
Yeah.
She had to be close to something.
Well, the Coast Guard was waiting for her response, so they were obviously involved as well, right? So they were like,
there's a lot of people involved in the situation, because it's you got one of the best nautical or navigators there are. You have a brave woman trying to set a record around the world, and what the heck went wrong? Where is she?
That's the question. That's what the question people have been asking for a long time. And you make excellent points. I think their radio equipment was pretty good. It's important to note that they never made two-way communication with the Itasca. The Itasca called out multiple times. She never made two-way communication back. She would just basically come on the mic and say, one or two things, and then she would cut off the mic. It's a lot of weird stuff. There's a lot of people. I mean, it kind of gets a little kind of out in the weeds, like I said, but a lot of people believe that the reason she never made two-way communication with the Itasca was because all the stuff that Earhart was saying was pre-recorded, and it was part of sort of a larger mission.
So they had a boat following her? Do they have a boat following her, like
not
in the ocean? Like, hey,
not following her.
No?
Yeah, no, not following her. No, they just had the Itasca sort of lie in wait off Howland, because they knew that was their mark, and that's what the Itasca did. They refueled airplanes that came into Howland. And they were there specifically to make radio contact with her and guide her in.
But why did they not have a boat that went with them? Mm-hmm. They have a lot of money. Then this is probably something that was sponsored. Well, this would be a great thing, and because because anything could go wrong. This is not like the best. This is not the best. I know it's the best equipment back then, but it's like an invention that's like new. It's like. It's the combustible engine was just like, right. The forefront of what it was back then. Now it's like, come on, that's just weird to me. There's a lot of holes in this stuff now, because I didn't think of it as this famous. Like, everybody, not that you just brought all this to my attention, Chris. So like, that's wow. Now I'm tripping. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Not go look for this. It's like, why not? That's bothers me now. It's like a cover up to me.
Yeah, well, to your point, to address that point, they did spend a lot of money looking for her. They were spending. Keep in mind, this is the middle of the Great Depression, and they were spending what was equivalent to $3 to $4 million, in the middle of the Great Depression, looking for her, which is a lot of money back then.
That's a lot of money.
So they did search for a couple of weeks. The British government helped. The Japanese government, ironically, helped. And you know, a lot of people were.
You think it might have just been to be like, oh, we'll help by have her. We know what you're doing or something. But I'm saying, why don't you have somebody with her down there in the water, constantly on her eye? Because like, hey, this is you're gonna encounter weather, anything. So we're gonna keep this with you. If you're gonna fund, all I know is that if I'm gonna do this, I would want to do it. And I was famous. My husband's a famous publisher. He has a lot of money. I'm chummy with the presidents. I'm chummy with all this. I'm basically out there I'm the LeBron James of women right now. You ain't got like someone watching me from down on the water and stuff, just around, because you never know what could happen. Like, man, that kind of bothers me now that somebody wouldn't think about that and keep that keep something like that going, because that would be a famous thing. You want this to be accomplished, or maybe you didn't want it to be accomplished. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. There's a lot of things they probably could have done. The lack of a plan B is paramount. I think when you look at this case, that they didn't have, the World Flight crew, it should be noted, the World Flight crew was actually supposed to be larger. There was a gentleman by the name of Harry Manning that was supposed to be on board with them. And Harry Manning was, among other things, an expert in Morse code. So if they had not been able to receive radio transmission as they were, then they could have transmitted Morse code, and the task could have taken a bearing, and they could have actually gotten a better idea of where they were at. But Harry Manning deplaned. He didn't want to be involved after the ground loop. And, a lot of people, there's speculation on why. It wasn't just because he had to get back to his, he only had a certain amount of time off of work, and he had to get back to work, for his regular job. And, there's people that think about that. There's people that think about, hey, he didn't want to continue because he thought she was negligent, and she was, she was too risky for him. But, if they had him on board, we'd probably be having a totally different discussion right now, historically speaking. She probably would have made it. Who knows? I mean, it's all speculation. This whole thing has become this giant mountain of speculation based off of, different types of evidence that all these different theories have in their, to support their work and their theory and what they believe happened. So, it's anybody's guess at this point.
Yeah, she must have had such a big impact to have so many people working on, trying to find out her death even to this day, so pretty interesting, man.
Yeah, this case is weird. This whole thing, I won't go too long, but I will just say that, this whole thing begins and ends with collaboration. So it starts with people coming together and sharing like information. That's how we got so far after 9/11. People are sort of hogging all their information, all these separate departments, and they decided to come together. And that's when we started to get a better understanding, right? Yeah. Arguing isn't going to get you anywhere, and forcing your arguments onto someone else in the hopes that they'll change your view, it's not going to work. 85 years have proven that. There needs to be a change in the way we talk about cases like this one. And if you have things to say them, but say them, find people who will listen, talk to them. The ones who aren't listening, pull back, because you're devaluing what you have to say by offering it up to an audience that does nothing but reject it. Yeah. And we've had our fill of that. So now it's time to pivot from there. And you're starting to see a lot of that, sort of that reach across the aisle, so to speak, that cross collaboration, cross theory, about people that are coming together and saying, hey, I like what you've got here. I disagree with this, but let's talk about this. This is an interesting thread. You're starting to see that. And I think that's the only way that cases like this are ever going to get solved. So,
that's good. Yeah. You guys got to work together, man. Like if there was detectives and let's say if murder happened over here and then they think it's the same murderer in this other department, if they have all this ego of like, I know I'm right about this, like it's better for them to come together, work it out, and tell this person what they know, and then this detective says what he knows, and then they work together, and then they solve the case. So I do believe that's 100%, man. Like,
right,
it happens a lot, though.
Yeah.
A lot of different things. JFK assassination.
Oh yeah.
There's a whole list of things you could talk about where people have an idea of what happened and they're just stuck on it. So yeah, it's just happened.
For the show, I have my role is fun in a way. I have three options. Not only in this case, but everything else we've covered. As a whole, I have to tell. I can tell, I can show, and I can prove. And my role in the show, it always begins with the story. That's the tell, right? So the show is me sort of laying out a different ending based on all the evidence that we've got. There's forensic evidence. There's all these different things. So I have to lay out a different ending. And with that, if we can't prove it unequivocally, the hope is that we can cast sort of enough doubt to have people look over from a crash and sink and give some attention to some of these other theories. And it's, Castaway and Tiger and that group, they've been masters at sort of, working the media and getting their story out there. And, they get a lot of attention every time they come out with something. That's important. I think anybody that comes out with something new in this case, whether it's Japanese capture or whatever the theory is, it helps because it forwards that case. And that's all that matters. We forward this case, and we try to sort of use inductive reasoning in the show to sort of see everything we can and then deduce from there, what is accurate and what is probably not accurate. And, my role in the show is to try to act as the advocate for all 5 of these theories and try to convince our jury, which is our listening audience, hey, this is what happened.
That's pretty cool. I'm gonna check your show out, bro. I could, that sounds like,
yeah.
I love murder mysteries. I love like the First 48. I love detective.
Oh yeah.
Work.
Yeah.
I'm not a cop or police officer, but I mean, I did some military stuff. But yeah, I'm gonna check your show out, man. It sounds very interesting.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we put a lot of work into it. It's a fun show.
Yeah.
It's a difficult show to do, but we put a lot of work into it. Our dives are really, really deep. So be prepared for that. We don't do these, 30-minute dives or 3 or 4 hour episodes, some cases. So we're dedicating, for one series anywhere between, 15 to 20 hours, when a lot of shows will dedicate, an hour to it. So our dives are pretty deep, and they're pretty robust. So, it's for those people who really want to dive deep.
Yeah. Which I really honestly 100% appreciate the research, bro. Cause we try to do as much research as we can. We have 54 episodes already. This will be the 55th.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We can't, we need to have subject matter experts like yourself to come on. We can only go so far, because we don't have 20 years of experience on the thing, so it's good to have subject matter experts on like yourself. So it helps us, because we could study, we can only get 20 hours, 30 hours of research before we have somebody on. We can't get 20 years. So it's good to have
sometimes I like to cram it in there. I like to cram it all in, and then I like to ask questions, and I just like to, but I like to, when you started telling me more about this is because I like the Titanic. I love the story of that. I loved stuff like that. I love the Bermuda Triangle. I love, the pyramids. And this is another one that I was like, man, when there's a lot of different conclusions to something. Yeah. It makes me, it's like, wow, man, that's interesting to me. This falls under a thing where, like, man, it's a mystery, and it could maybe the higher upper echelon, maybe they know the real story, and they know the rest of it. And they just don't like there's
they try to create. That's why
you know what I mean. Like they know it. They might know it. Who knows? Like you said, but the stuff like this is very amazing once you started to bring out all the information. Because before, to me, it was just something history that just happened where I thought she was trying to break a record. I thought she was a nobody. Yeah. Because I didn't dig that deep when I was a kid. I was only like, and then when you start bringing the fact that all this stuff, I was like, wow, that's a whole new thought to my head about it. I was like, okay, well, there's a lot more to this story, because she was pretty BA, dude. I like that.
Oh yeah. As my son says, she was a G for sure. So she absolutely was. She absolutely was. At 100%, I agree with you. And it's we're optimistic. It's a big ocean. And even if you have an area of several thousand miles, that's a lot to do. And when you do something like a tow array, which is basically a kind of a digital, you're kind of dragging or ROVs, and you're kind of looking at certain areas, you're moving at 2 knots. So, you can walk faster than that. So it's a really slow process, and it costs a lot of money to go out in the middle of the ocean and search for Earhart now to this day. And, it's a case that, it'll continue to baffle. It's not unlike some of the other cases we've covered. It's a case that grabs hold of people, and it doesn't let go, and people just kind of can't get out of it. I'm a good example of that, I think, and it's funny you mentioned that, me coming on the show as a subject matter expert. I feel the same way about everybody that we talk to on the show. Everybody that's in the book, everybody that we talk to, they're all the stars of the show. I'm just sort of, doling out the questions and trying to kind of be, a representation of the audience, and ask the certain questions that audience members would ask if they were hosting the show. So that's kind of always been my role. And it's been really a lot of fun over the years to sort of learn from all these people and educate myself on it and get to the point where I can talk about it, confidently based off of where I am now. So it's been a lot of fun.
And you heard about us through Mark Sargent, you said, right?
I did. Yes, I did. I saw the Mark Sargent piece. Yeah. Mark is a sweetheart of a guy. I have another show called Me and My Friends, and it's just a very little minuscule thing that I do, but it's more of a personal deal. And I reached out to him early in that show. And I just said, hey, I saw the Netflix film, and I said, hey, I'd love to talk to you more about this. And it's a chance for me to venture outside of Earhart and some of the stuff I cover on Vanished, and venture into subjects that I've always wanted to venture into and talk to people that I admire. And he's just one on a long list, but he's a really great guy, and very open-minded, down to earth. Yeah.
Dude, I agree with you 100%, man. I just want to say, like, Mark Sargent, nice person.
Absolutely.
Passionate.
No ego there at all. Yeah.
Yeah. He'll just give you his phone number, and like, you hit him up. Yeah. If you want me to come on at 5 a.m, Josh, I'll come on. I'm like, really? Oh my goodness. Like, super nice guy, super humble. And I agree, man. If Mark, if you ever listen to this show, I don't know if you're gonna listen to this one, but
shout out to Mark Sargent. Yeah.
Shout out to Mark Sargent, man.
People like that are how we're going to solve cases like this one. He's open, he's welcoming. He's one of those people that, hey, I'll have that discussion with you. You can disagree with me, and we'll have that discussion, and we'll talk amicably about it. And he takes a lot of it. It's a tough thing for him to be involved in, and he takes a lot of that in stride. And it takes a big person to be able to just let that stuff roll off your back and not worry about it. It's admirable. So, that's why I reached out to him initially, and I only had the one conversation with him, but the biggest sweetheart ever. And I can't say enough good things about Mark Sargent. So, yeah.
Anything else you want to leave our audience with? Because we'll get it. Maybe we'll have another show on DB Cooper or something like that. Yeah. Because I don't want to. That's a whole nother can of worms to bring on. So that way me and Jason could study up on it, and we could try to do it, man. We'll do another show.
I'd be honored. I'd be honored to come back on. Yeah, I just thanks for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I been sort of neck deep in this book for a long time, for the better part of a year and a half now, editing this book and going through it, and we're sort of at a really cool time. But it's been fun to just come on the show and just kind of talk about all this stuff in a loose sort of format, a casual format. That's what I try to promote on the show, and it's been a lot of fun, man. People check out the show if you like historical mystery, if you like with a little bit of legal, if you like a little mix of true crime. We did do Jack the Ripper. I would say that I wouldn't
there's another I like, dude, that's a
big one.
I'm super into,
and I had no idea.
I'm super into that stuff. I love that stuff. It makes me feel like, man, you start thinking outside the box, and you're like, man, what happened here? What is this guy thinking? Why would he do this? And why would they target this person? It's like, man, it's like, what gets their rocks off? I know that as a Christian and stuff like that, I know we have a show like that, and it's like, I don't like to get in it. I don't like to get in that now, but back then I used to love that stuff, man. I'm like, did you do that?
No, it's
twisting your mind up. Like I study up on the Night Stalker. I read his autobiography, and I was like, once I got like almost halfway through, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't read this anymore. It's like this guy was like totally sick. And when you start getting into it, it feels like, man, you could once you start digging, you're like, man, why do these things happen? Why this is and when you go in, like you said, like a 4-hour show like that, I talk all night about this now.
Dude, I'm right there with you, man. Jack the Ripper I would not recommend younger listeners listening to that piece. Jack the Ripper, I was very ignorant to that case. I didn't know that it was that big of a deal, or it was that robust. And it's one of the most horrific things you'll ever experience. We did the show, and I purposely didn't do a lot of studying before we did the show. I wanted that to sort of kind of, unravel itself as kind of the show went on. And I hadn't seen the crime scene photos for like the Mary Jane Kelly murders and some of the stuff that Ripper was, attributed to doing. And it's the most brutal, graphic stuff. And you look at someone like Richard Ramirez, and you look at someone like a lot of these modern day serial killers, and this is not a compliment whatsoever, but they all were sort of inspired in a sick way by this guy. This guy is like I don't want to say anything positive, but he's the one that everybody sort of looks to sort of like emulate and try to top. And it's a brutal story. And it was very difficult. It's when you see those crime scene photos, it's very difficult to see that somebody could do that to another human being. He's the very definition of evil. So it was a different pivot for us, because we started, we did Earhart for 16 episodes and, got 100 hours of content or whatever. And then we started season 2 with Jack the Ripper, which is the exact opposite of who Amelia Earhart's character was.
Yeah.
So
you got to see
two
what we
is
do.
Yeah.
We're talking about God and Jesus on one episode, and the next episode we're talking about Johnny Gosh and a pedophile ring. So
hey man,
we
that's
have the same stuff going on, man. But
when you spin truth, it doesn't matter. You're spreading.
We're trying to we're exposing evil, bro. No matter what, we're trying to expose evil, and God says to do that. In Ephesians, expose it. If you see it, expose it. That's what we're trying to do on the show, as much as possible. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you shout out your podcast again?
Sure.
That get that. Also the name of your book, so that I have that and they have that. And then also your Instagram and stuff, so people can follow you.
Yeah, man. Just, on social media, it's just Vanished Pod. Vanished Pod is you just search that on social media, will come up. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram at Vanished Pod. Facebook.com/Vanished Podcast, I think, is our Facebook, and we have a group on there, so you guys are welcome to, if you like this kind of stuff, to get into the group and talk mystery with us, talk some stuff. And then we've also got the book coming out. The book is called Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan, and it's going to be out on July the 2nd, the 85th anniversary, God willing. It'll be out on that day, if it kills me. And we have season 2 of Vanished. We're in the middle of season 2, sort of on a little bit of a hiatus right now. We've done, as I said, we opened with Jack the Ripper. We went back to 1865 and did John Wilkes Booth and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And then we just wrapped up. We just wrapped up DB Cooper, and we have a couple other fun ones in the pipeline. Zodiac's one of them. Henry Avery's another one. There's a lot of fun ones we're gonna do. So
these are all good. These are all just like these are all top 10 things that I am man.
Yeah.
It's so cool. I've watched so much stuff and read a lot of books on these things, and it's like, wow, man. Yeah. It would be fun to come on your show and pick your brain, pick your brain, do a show about something good. That's pretty cool, man.
Absolutely. It's a lot of fun. It's a fun wheelhouse to be in. And, we have a great show. We have a fun show. It's hard to listen to at some points, because it's some disturbing stuff, some disturbing content, but it's historical and it's important. And it's, it's one of those things. So that's
Jeffrey
what we do.
We did Jeffrey Epstein.
It's cool.
So much stuff. So, all right. Well, let's end this in prayer, guys. First of all, let me just tell you guys, follow him, check out his podcast. Guys, and definitely follow him on Instagram. And then once the book comes out, what's the name of the book? I'm sorry.
So it's okay. The book is called Rabbit Hole. And the subtitle is Rabbit Hole: The Vanishing of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan.
Bro, how'd you get that title? I thought someone would definitely have that title. Rabbit Hole?
Yeah, Rabbit Hole. That's what the case is. So I just I decided to name it that. So that'll be out on July 2nd. It's from Into the Fray. They're publishing it. They're a great partnering team with us, and awesome. And we're excited to put it out, man.
All right, Chris. Good man. Thank you for being on here, man. Thank you so much. I like I said earlier, I was a little exhausted from work today, but right now when it comes in this mix, man, this is like it woke me up, and I'm feeling good, and I'm like, wow, I'm gonna go watch some stuff once and just go back.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah, man. Yeah, happy to be here. It's been an honor. I appreciate both of you.
Thank you. We'll end this in prayer. Father God, in the name of Jesus, thank you so much for a clear connection. We appreciate anybody that's listening right now that needs you, Lord. Please put your healing hand on them. My family just got over this COVID. We got sick. We had the flu, whatever. Please help out everybody that's sick right now. Help Chris with his new book, Rabbit Hole. Help it get promoted. Help it. Help people to solve this case. And Lord, help more people to get into the Bible. To help more people to to start learning about you, Lord. Thank you so much for everything you do for us. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. Chris,
Great final
thank you
prayer.
so much, man. I appreciate you coming on, dude. Thank you. And Jason, thank you so much, bro, for taking your time out, even though you were tired.